Whispers of treason and conspiracies haunt him. Fear fuels his spiraling paranoia. To protect his throne, he unleashes a reign of terror that will forever stain his name in blood. His name is Ivan the Terrible, and this is his villainy. Hello and welcome to Fireside Villainies, where we step into the dark shadows of history and unravel the chilling tales of the world's most infamous figures. My name is Michael, and in this episode we travel to medieval Russia, a land of vast plains and gilded domes, where a young boy inherited a throne destined for greatness. But, as we'll discover, power has a way of distorting even the brightest potential, turning hope into horror. Today we delve into the life and legacy of Ivan IV, the first Tsar of all Russia, whose name has echoed through the centuries with a chilling epithet, the Terrible. Was Ivan a visionary leader or a tyrant born from the trauma of his youth? Could his reign have been avoided, or was it inevitable in a land as turbulent as 16th century Russia? Prepare to be captivated and disturbed as we trace the rise and fall of a man whose rule was marked by brilliance, bloodshed, and the suppression of all who opposed him. Thank you for watching and listening to Fireside Villainies. Let's now gather around the fire and begin this episode by taking a brief look at what was happening during Ivan the Terrible's time that contributed to his villainous story. In the heart of the 16th century, the vast expanse of Muscovy, the precursor to modern Russia, was a realm in flux. The Mongol yoke, a centuries-long period of subjugation, had recently been cast off, leaving a power vacuum in its wake. Grand princes jostled for control, their ambitions fueled by dreams of a unified and powerful Russian state. At the center of this turbulent landscape stood the city of Moscow, a burgeoning metropolis adorned with gilded domes and imposing Kremlins. It was here in 1530 CE that Ivan IV, the future Tsar, was born. His father, Grand Prince Vasily III, ruled with an iron fist, expanding Moscow's influence and laying the groundwork for a centralized state. However, Ivan's childhood was far from idyllic. Court intrigue and power struggles were rife, and the young prince was exposed to the darker side of politics from an early age. When his father died in 1533, Ivan, just 3 years old, was thrust onto the throne, a pawn in a dangerous game played by ambitious boyars, the high-ranking members of the Russian aristocracy, and power-hungry relatives. The regency that followed was marked by instability and violence. Ivan's mother, Yelena Glinskaya, ruled with a firm hand, but her sudden death in 1538 plunged the court into chaos. The young Tsar became a witness to a series of brutal power struggles, witnessing firsthand the ruthlessness and treachery of those vying for control. Meanwhile, beyond the walls of the Kremlin, the Russian people yearned for stability and strong leadership. The specter of the Mongol invasion still lingered, and the threat of external aggression remained constant. The boyars, the powerful noble families, held vast swathes of land and exerted considerable influence, often at the expense of the central authority. It was in this tumultuous climate that Ivan the Terrible came of age. The experiences of his childhood, the constant power struggles, and the sense of vulnerability instilled in him a deep-seated suspicion and a thirst for absolute control. As he grew older, these traits would manifest themselves in increasingly brutal and unpredictable ways, shaping the course of Russian history for generations to come. To understand how this child, shaped by fear and suspicion, grew into a tyrant whose name would echo in infamy, we must turn back to the earliest years of Ivan's life, where the seeds of cruelty and terror first took root. Chapter 1. A Troubled Childhood. In the year 1530, within the imposing walls of the Kremlin, where shadows danced in the flickering candlelight and secrets clung to the ancient stones, a son was born to Grand Prince Vasily III and his wife Yelena. The infant's cries echoed through the gilded halls, heralding the arrival of an heir, a future Tsar. But even as the bells of Moscow pealed in celebration, a chill wind whispered through the palace corridors, carrying a prophecy of blood and darkness. For this child, christened Ivan, was destined to walk a path stained crimson, his name forever synonymous with terror and tyranny. The boy's early years were anything but idyllic. Court intrigue swirled like a poisonous fog, and young Ivan was not spared its chilling touch. When Ivan was just 3 years old, his father, the Grand Prince, succumbed to an infection. A collective gasp echoed through the Kremlin as the boy, barely out of swaddling clothes, was declared the Grand Prince of Moscow. The tender age of the new ruler only intensified the power struggles that had simmered beneath the surface. Yelena, Ivan's mother, a woman of fierce ambition and cunning, seized the reins of the regency with an iron grip upon Vasily III's death, but her rule was short-lived. She swiftly consolidated her power, banishing rival claimants to the throne and ruthlessly suppressing any opposition. Determined to secure her son's future, she embarked on a series of reforms, stabilizing the currency, bolstering Moscow's defenses, and even expanding its territory. Yet Yelena's rule was not without its controversies. Her close relationship with a handsome young boyar fueled rumors of impropriety, and her reliance on a select group of advisors alienated many within the court. Despite her efforts to shield young Ivan from the harsh realities of power, he witnessed the ruthless machinations of his mother's regency firsthand. This exposure to political intrigue and the constant threat of betrayal would leave a lasting mark on the impressionable boy, planting the seeds of suspicion and paranoia that would later blossom into full-blown tyranny. Just 5 years after the Grand Prince Vasily III's death, Yelena met an untimely demise, whispered rumors of poison clinging to her memory. Ivan, now 8 years old, was left an orphan, a pawn in a dangerous game played by ruthless boyars vying for control. In the power vacuum left by Yelena's death, 2 powerful boyar families, the Shuiskys and the Bielskys, quickly rose to prominence, each eager to assert control over the young Tsar and the vast Muscovite realm. The Shuisky family, led by Prince Vasily Shuisky, sought to consolidate power through shrewd political maneuvering and alliances. On the other side, the Bielskys, led by Ivan Bielsky, pursued a more aggressive approach, engaging in open rivalry with the Shuiskys. As these factions fought for dominance, Ivan became a pawn in their bitter struggle, manipulated by both sides as they jostled for control of the throne. But the boy Tsar, though still young, was no passive observer. He watched as the boyars ruthlessly plotted, imprisoning or banishing those who opposed them. With each betrayal, Ivan's suspicions deepened, and the seeds of his future cruelty began to take root. As Ivan entered his teenage years, he grew increasingly aware of the treacherous world around him. Instead of retreating into the shadows of the court, the young Tsar began to engage more actively in the palace intrigue. His growing awareness of the boyars' power plays stoked a burning desire for control. He learned to pit factions against each other, slowly asserting his influence, even as the Bielskys and the Shuiskys continued their power struggle. Ivan knew that if he were to ever truly rule, he must break free from the manipulations of the boyar elite. The boy Tsar became a witness to a parade of cruelty and betrayal. He saw his caretakers imprisoned, poisoned, or exiled. He saw the boyars, those supposed pillars of the realm, squabble and scheme, their eyes fixed not on the welfare of the state, but on their own enrichment. These early experiences scarred Ivan deeply. The seeds of suspicion and paranoia were sown in his heart, fertilized by the harsh realities of his childhood. The boy who should have been nurtured and protected was instead exposed to the darkest corners of human nature. As Ivan grew, so too did his thirst for power, his desire to control a world that had shown him little but chaos and treachery. The boy Tsar, once a timid observer, began to assert himself, his actions taking on a disturbing edge. One day, as courtiers watched in horrified silence, the young Ivan cornered a stray dog in the palace courtyard. His laughter echoed eerily as he chased the terrified animal, pelting it with stones and sticks. Finally, catching the whimpering creature, he held it aloft, its struggles growing weaker. A cruel smile played on Ivan's lips as he dropped the dog from the ramparts, its pitiful yelps cut short by the sickening thud below. The courtiers exchanged uneasy glances, a chill settling over them. This was not the playful cruelty of a child, but a glimpse into a darkness that threatened to engulf the young Tsar's soul. It was as if the boy, robbed of his innocence too soon, sought to reclaim his power through acts of cruelty, a twisted form of self-preservation in a world where trust was a luxury he could not afford. The stage was set for the rise of a tyrant. The boy who had witnessed the worst of humanity was slowly transforming into a man who would embody its darkest impulses. Ivan the Terrible was not born but made, forged in the maelstrom of a childhood steeped in fear and betrayal. And as his power grew, the land would soon know the fury of its Tsar. Chapter 2: The Rise of a Tyrant. As Ivan emerged from the shadows of his troubled childhood, he ascended the throne not just as a ruler, but as a reformer. The young Tsar, barely out of his teens, embarked on a series of ambitious initiatives to modernize Russia and consolidate his power. He reformed the legal code, curbed the influence of the boyars, and expanded the borders of his realm through a series of successful military campaigns. But the true turning point in Ivan's rise came in 1547, when, at the age of 16, he became the first ruler of Russia to take the title of Tsar, a title that echoed the grandeur of Caesar and signified a ruler ordained by God. This coronation was not a mere ceremonial formality. It marked a profound transformation as Ivan declared himself the supreme ruler of all Russia, claiming divine authority over his people and cementing his power far beyond that of any previous Grand Prince. The coronation, held in the Grand Cathedral of the Dormition in Moscow, was a lavish and symbolic affair, signaling to the world that Muscovy was no longer just a loose federation of principalities. It was an emerging empire under the will of one man. Inspired by the writings of Byzantine scholars and driven by a desire to strengthen his authority, Ivan sought to transform Russia into a centralized and powerful state, capable of rivaling the great empires of Europe. Early in his reign, Ivan moved swiftly to address the many fractures in his realm. In 1550, he enacted the Sudebnik, a comprehensive legal code aimed at reforming the judicial system, curbing corruption, and ensuring greater justice across the land. The Sudebnik represented a major step in centralizing authority and reducing the influence of local boyars, who had long acted as de facto rulers in their respective regions. It established laws that regulated the court system, streamlined tax collection, and increased penalties for crimes, reflecting Ivan's vision of a more orderly and controlled Russia. In 1551, Ivan convened the Stoklavy Sobor, a church council that sought to reform the Russian Orthodox Church. The council dealt with issues of church discipline, clarified religious rights, and established a uniformity in practices across Russia's vast territories. This council, too, was a means for Ivan to assert control over the powerful institution of the Church, ensuring that it would remain loyal to the Tsar's vision for a unified Russia. For a brief moment, these early reforms brought hope to the realm. Ivan's ambition seemed guided by a desire to lift Russia into a new era of stability and prosperity. Amidst these sweeping changes, a personal joy also blossomed in Ivan's life. In 1547, he married Anastasia Romanovna, a young woman chosen from a wide selection of eligible brides presented to the Tsar. Anastasia, known for her gentle spirit and kind heart, quickly captured Ivan's affections. Their marriage was a rare oasis of tenderness in a life marked by turmoil and violence. Chronicles of the time speak of their deep bond, their shared love for their children, and Anastasia's moderating influence on Ivan's volatile temperament. Over the years, Anastasia bore Ivan several children, their family growing amidst the grandeur of the Kremlin. However, infant mortality claimed the lives of several of their offspring. Only 2 sons, Ivan Ivanovich and Fyodor, would survive to adulthood, their lives intertwined with the complex and often brutal legacy of their father. The loss of his other children weighed on Ivan, contributing to the growing darkness that threatened to consume him. For a brief moment during this period, it seemed as though Ivan might fulfill the promise of his early reign. He was hailed as a visionary, a leader who would usher Russia into a new era of prosperity and strength. But beneath the veneer of progress, the seeds of tyranny were already taking root. The turning point came in 1560, with the sudden and tragic death of his first wife, Anastasia. The Tsar was inconsolable, his grief morphing into a consuming rage. He became convinced that Anastasia had been poisoned by the boyars, his paranoia feeding on the whispers and rumors that swirled around the court. "The boyars, they have taken everything from me," Ivan roared, his voice echoing through the halls of the Kremlin. "They will pay for their treachery." The death of Anastasia marked a chilling transformation in Ivan's character. The once promising reformer became increasingly unpredictable, his moods shifting from melancholic brooding to violent outbursts. He saw enemies everywhere, his trust in those around him eroded by suspicion and fear. In 1565, Ivan unleashed his most terrifying creation, the Oprichnina, a state within a state, composed of his most loyal and ruthless followers, tasked with rooting out treason and enforcing his will through fear and violence. This secret police, clad in black robes and riding black horses, became the instrument of Ivan's wrath. They swept through the countryside like a plague of locusts, their arrival heralded by the ominous thudding of hooves and the chilling jingle of their bridles adorned with severed dogs' heads and brooms, grim symbols of their mission to sniff out treason and sweep it away. The Oprichniki were members of Ivan's secret police force who enforced the Oprichnina policy. One moonless night, the Oprichniki descended upon the peaceful village of Kostroma. The villagers, roused from their sleep by the frantic barking of dogs, huddled in terror as the black-clad horsemen stormed through the streets. A nobleman, suspected of harboring disloyal sentiments, was dragged from his home, his pleas for mercy falling on deaf ears. Before the eyes of his terrified family, he was stripped, bound, and subjected to a grotesque mockery of a trial. Accusations of plotting against the Tsar, conspiring with foreign powers, and even practicing witchcraft were hurled at him, their veracity irrelevant in the face of the Oprichniki's thirst for blood. Confessions were extracted through torture, the nobleman's screams filling the night air, and a swift verdict of guilt pronounced. The nobleman's screams, a chilling symphony of agony, pierced the night as the Oprichniki revelled in their sadistic sentence. His body was now a mangled ruin, flesh torn, bones splintered, and blood staining the frozen earth. They left him there, a grotesque spectacle, a gruesome warning to any who dared whisper a word against the Tsar. The villagers, their faces pale masks of terror, huddled together, their eyes wide with the unspeakable horror they had witnessed. The Oprichniki, their dark laughter echoing in the night, rode away, leaving behind a desolate landscape of shattered lives, extinguished hope, and the lingering stench of death. The Oprichniki were granted absolute power to arrest, torture, and execute anyone suspected of disloyalty. The Oprichniki, answerable only to the Tsar, descended upon the Russian countryside like a plague, leaving a trail of terror and devastation in their wake. Villages were razed, families torn apart, and the boyars, once the proud elite of Russia, were subjected to humiliation and torture. Ivan himself often participated in the Oprichniki's sadistic rituals, reveling in the fear and suffering he inflicted. One particularly dark evening, Ivan joined the Oprichniki in a grim procession through a remote village. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and fear as the Tsar, clad in his ominous black robes, led the group through the narrow, dirt-laden streets. Torches flickered in the hands of the Oprichniki, casting eerie shadows on the crumbling walls of the peasant huts. Torches flickered in the hands of the Oprichniki, casting eerie shadows on the crumbling walls of the peasant huts. Ivan's eyes gleamed with a chilling intensity as he approached a group of trembling villagers, dragged from their homes and forced to their knees before him. The Oprichniki stood silently, awaiting his command, their faces obscured by the black hoods that marked them as the Tsar's enforcers of terror. Without a word, Ivan signaled to one of the Oprichniki, who immediately seized a young man from the group. The Tsar's gaze never wavered as the man was brought before him, begging for mercy. But mercy was not a word Ivan knew. With a slow, deliberate motion, he unsheathed his dagger, its blade glinting menacingly in the firelight. The villagers watched in horror as Ivan's hand moved with calculated precision, tracing the edge of the dagger across the man's cheek. The Tsar's voice, low and dripping with malice, echoed through the silence. "This is what happens to those who dare defy me." With a swift and merciless strike, he plunged the dagger into the man's chest, silencing his cries forever. The village was left in shambles, the lifeless bodies of those deemed disloyal strewn across the ground, a grim testament to Ivan's unyielding cruelty. The Oprichniki, their dark task complete, vanished into the night, leaving behind only the echoes of Ivan's maniacal laughter, a sound that would haunt the survivors for the rest of their days. As the Oprichnina's terror spread, the human cost was staggering. It is estimated that between 6,000 and 10,000 boyars, nobles, and commoners alike were executed during Ivan's purges. The countryside was devastated, with entire villages razed, crops destroyed, and families torn apart. The once thriving Russian heartland was left scarred by the bloodshed, and the psychological toll on the population was immeasurable. The Oprichnina became a symbol of Ivan's reign of terror, a dark stain on the fabric of Russian history. The Tsar, once hailed as a liberator, had become the very embodiment of tyranny. The rise of Ivan the Terrible was complete, and the land would bear the scars of his cruelty for generations to come. Chapter 3: The Tsar's Brides. The death of Anastasia, Ivan's first wife, marked a turning point in his reign. The light in his eyes dimmed, replaced by a growing suspicion and cruelty. His subsequent marriages, far from offering solace, became a chilling reflection of his inner turmoil. Ivan would marry 6 more times, each union marked by tragedy and despair. Maria Temryokovna, a Circassian princess, exotic and defiant, entered the Kremlin as his second wife in 1561. Her striking beauty and strong personality initially captivated Ivan, offering a stark contrast to the gentle Anastasia. However, her foreign origin and unfamiliar customs quickly made her a target of suspicion and resentment among the Russian nobility. They whispered of her pagan influence, accusing her of manipulating the Tsar and poisoning his mind against his own people. These rumors fueled Ivan's growing paranoia, twisting his love for Maria into a possessive fear. He became increasingly isolated, relying on her counsel above all others, further alienating the boyars. Maria's sudden death in 1569, likely from illness, devastated Ivan. He blamed the boyars for poisoning her, plunging him deeper into a spiral of suspicion and violence that would mark the darkest chapter of his reign. After Maria's death, Ivan sought a new bride, but now his approach had become chillingly methodical. In a ritual deeply rooted in Russian tradition, Ivan initiated the bride show, a custom that required noble families to present their unmarried daughters for the Tsar's inspection. These young women were scrutinized based on their beauty, health, and lineage, all in the hopes of catching the eye of the unpredictable ruler. The bride show was a stark reflection of Ivan's growing distrust of those around him. He no longer relied on traditional alliances or political marriages, but sought absolute control over his next wife. The women selected for the Tsar were often kept isolated, away from outside influences, a direct manifestation of Ivan's fear that even his own household could be plotting against him. It was during one such bride show in 1571 that Ivan chose his third wife, Marfa Sobakina, a noblewoman whose beauty captivated the Tsar. However, their marriage was cursed from the start. Just days after their wedding, Marfa fell gravely ill, and within weeks she was dead. The suddenness of her death fueled Ivan's paranoia, and he once again suspected poison, further entrenching his belief that even those closest to him could not be trusted. Marfa's death sent shockwaves through the court. With whispers of poison filling the air, Ivan's rage and distrust only deepened, and his subsequent marriages became even more troubled. Anna Koltovskaya, Ivan's fourth wife, and Anna Vasilchikova, his fifth, both met similar tragic fates. Chosen in bride shows, these young women were initially symbols of hope, a chance for Ivan to find solace and companionship after the loss of his beloved Anastasia. However, their unions were short-lived and marked by the Tsar's growing instability. Anna Koltovskaya, in particular, endured Ivan's volatile moods and erratic behavior. As his paranoia deepened, he began to see enemies everywhere, even in his own wife. Accusing her of plotting against him, he forced her to take vows and enter a convent, effectively ending their marriage and condemning her to a life of seclusion and prayer. Anna Vasilchikova suffered a similar fate. Though less is known about her, it's believed that Ivan quickly grew tired of her, perhaps finding her too meek or unremarkable compared to his previous wives. Like Anna Koltovskaya, she was banished to a convent, her dreams of love and happiness crushed under the weight of the Tsar's whims. These forced monastic vows were a cruel punishment, robbing these women of their freedom and any chance of a normal life. They became victims of Ivan's capriciousness, their stories serving as a chilling reminder of the Tsar's absolute power and the vulnerability of those who dared to enter his inner circle. Vasilisia Melentieva, Ivan's sixth wife, met a particularly grim fate, one that further fueled the Tsar's descent into madness. Whispers of infidelity swirled around Vasilisia, painting her as a temptress who had betrayed the Tsar's trust. Whether these rumors were true or merely the product of court intrigue remains uncertain. However, for Ivan, consumed by paranoia and suspicion, they were enough to seal her fate. In a fit of rage, Fueled by jealousy and a twisted sense of justice, Ivan reportedly had Vasilisa executed in 1579. Her alleged betrayal served as further proof to the Tsar that he was surrounded by enemies, even within his own household. This tragic event deepened his mistrust of those closest to him, driving him to even greater acts of cruelty and solidifying his reputation as a tyrant. And finally, Maria Dolgorukaya, Ivan's seventh wife, met a horrific end that epitomized the Tsar's cruelty and warped sense of morality. Married in 1580, Maria's union with Ivan was tragically brief. On their wedding night, the Tsar unjustly decided that she was not a virgin. In a twisted act, Ivan had her drowned, her lifeless body a chilling symbol of his absolute power and the terrifying consequences of failing to meet his impossible standards. Maria's death sent shockwaves through the court, solidifying Ivan's reputation as a monstrous tyrant. It was a stark reminder that even the Tsar's brides were not safe from his wrath, their lives subject to his whims and twisted interpretations of morality. The tragic fate of Maria Dolgorukaya serves as a haunting illustration of the depths of Ivan's depravity and the terror that gripped Russia under his rule. The Tsar's heart had become a cold, dark place. No woman could find happiness there. Boyars whispered amongst themselves, their eyes filled with fear and pity for the Tsar's brides. "Another one gone," they'd murmur. "How many more will suffer this fate?" The Kremlin, once a symbol of power and grandeur, echoed with the silent screams of Ivan's wives. Chapter 4: Reign of Terror. As the Oprichnina's grip tightened, a suffocating pall of fear descended upon Russia. No one was safe from Ivan's paranoia, not even the ancient and prosperous city of Novgorod, located in northwestern Russia. A major center of trade and politics, Novgorod served as a key member of the Hanseatic League, established to protect and control trade routes and economic interests. In 1570, fueled by rumors of treason and the plan to defect to the Kingdom of Poland, Ivan turned his wrath upon this once great metropolis. The icy wind howled across the snow-covered plains, mirroring the storm raging within Ivan's heart. He sat astride his horse, a dark silhouette against the backdrop of Novgorod's imposing walls. The city, once a beacon of prosperity and independence, now lay in his crosshairs, a target for his all-consuming wrath. "Treason," he muttered, his breath clouding the air. "They plot against me, these Novgorodians. They conspire with my enemies and challenge my divine right to rule." Beside him, the Oprichniki, his loyal hounds of terror, shifted restlessly, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. They were eager to unleash their savagery, to paint the pristine snow with crimson streaks of violence. Ivan's gaze swept across the city, his mind a maelstrom of suspicion and paranoia. Whispers of betrayal had reached his ears, tales of Novgorod's secret alliance with his enemies. He saw disloyalty in every shadow, conspiracy in every hushed conversation. "They dare to defy me," he muttered, his voice a low growl. "They will learn the price of disobedience." His grip tightened on the reins, his knuckles white with barely contained fury. The city, oblivious to the impending doom, continued its daily rhythms, unaware of the storm gathering on its outskirts. Ivan raised his hand, a signal that sent a shiver of excitement through the ranks of the Oprichniki. The moment of reckoning had arrived. Novgorod's fate was sealed. "Let them taste the Tsar's wrath," he declared, his voice cutting through the icy air. "Let them know that treason will not be tolerated." With a roar, the Oprichniki surged forward, a black tide of violence crashing against the city walls. The massacre had begun. The city, unprepared for such an onslaught, fell quickly. What followed was a massacre of unimaginable brutality. The Oprichniki rampaged through the streets, looting, burning, and slaughtering indiscriminately. Men, women, and children were tortured and killed, their screams echoing through the once bustling city. The Archbishop of Novgorod, a respected figure, was stripped naked, tied to a horse, and dragged through the streets until he died. Thousands were drowned in the Volkhov River, their bodies clogging the waterways. The Massacre of Novgorod lasted for weeks, a testament to Ivan's insatiable thirst for vengeance. The Massacre of Novgorod, one of the most infamous atrocities of Ivan's reign, was carried out with a brutality that shocked even his most hardened contemporaries. It is estimated that between 25,000 to 60,000 people were killed during the siege and its aftermath. The rivers ran red with blood as thousands of bodies were dumped into the Volkhov River. The once thriving city was reduced to ruins, its streets littered with corpses, and its survivors traumatized and broken. Entire families were wiped out. The city's trade and infrastructure collapsed. The massacre had lasting economic repercussions, not just for Novgorod, but for Russia as a whole, as the city had been a key member of the Hanseatic League. Ivan's paranoia and insatiable thirst for vengeance obliterated a metropolis that had stood as a beacon of prosperity. While Ivan's reign of terror through the Oprichnina had left an indelible mark on Russian society, his ambitions also extended beyond Russia's borders. In 1558, he launched the Livonian War, a grueling conflict aimed at gaining access to the Baltic Sea and expanding Russia's influence in the region. What began as a strategic and territorial pursuit soon devolved into a disaster that would haunt Ivan for the rest of his life. The war dragged on for 25 years, involving multiple European powers, including Poland, Sweden, and Denmark. Initially, Ivan achieved some victories, but as the conflict persisted, the tide turned against him. The Livonian War became a series of costly failures. Russia's resources were drained, its economy weakened, and its military overextended. The boyars and the military, once loyal to Ivan, began to question his leadership. These defeats only deepened Ivan's paranoia, fueling the violent purges he unleashed at home. The human toll of the war was staggering. It is estimated that over 150,000 Russian soldiers and civilians perished during the prolonged conflict. Entire villages in the northwest were ravaged by raids, famine, and disease. The constant pressure of warfare decimated Russia's military capabilities, and by the end of the war, the army, once one of Ivan's greatest instruments of power, had been reduced to a shadow of its former strength. Many of the territories Ivan had sought to conquer fell to foreign hands, leaving Russia isolated and vulnerable. In 1582, the war had effectively ended in defeat, with Russia losing many of the territories it had initially gained. This humiliation profoundly affected Ivan, intensifying his erratic behavior and increasing his suspicion of betrayal within his court. His dreams of turning Russia into a dominant Baltic power had been shattered, and the psychological scars of this failure contributed significantly to his later instability. Back in Moscow, Ivan's paranoia continued to spiral. The Oprichniki's reign of terror intensified, and even the Tsar's closest advisors were not immune. Boyars who had served Ivan faithfully for years were suddenly accused of treason, their lands and titles confiscated. The slightest whisper of dissent was enough to seal one's fate. Despite Ivan's increasing violence, by 1572 the Oprichnina had officially been abolished. The system that had allowed Ivan to unleash his wrath on boyars and commoners alike was dismantled, not because of Ivan's change of heart, but due to its growing ineffectiveness and the economic devastation it caused. However, the brutal legacy of the Oprichnina persisted. The terror it inspired had woven itself into the fabric of Russian society, and Ivan continued to govern with the same iron fist, though now without the formal structure of the Oprichniki. The chaos left behind by the Oprichnina did not fully dissipate with its abolition. The land was still scarred, its people fearful, and the power of the boyars had been irreversibly shattered. The Tsar, though stripped of his direct force of enforcers, maintained his reign of terror through other means. In 1581, within the gilded halls of the Kremlin, a tragedy unfolded that would forever stain Ivan's legacy. A heated argument erupted between father and son, the air thick with tension and unspoken resentments. Ivan Ivanovich, the Tsarevich, 27 years old, a young man of promise and potential, dared to question his father's brutal methods, pleading for mercy for the people. Ivan, consumed by paranoia and rage, saw this defiance as a threat to his authority, a betrayal of his own flesh and blood. In a blind fury, he lashed out, striking his son with his iron-tipped staff. The blow, delivered with the full force of the Tsar's anger, landed on the Tsarevich's head, shattering his skull. The young prince collapsed, blood pooling on the ornate floor. The court fell silent, the air thick with horror and disbelief. Ivan, the color drained from his face, stood frozen, the iron-tipped staff still clutched in his hand. A wave of nausea washed over him as the realization of his actions sunk in. He rushed to his son's side, his hands trembling as he cradled the Tsarevich's broken body. My son, he whispered, his voice choked with anguish. But Ivan Ivanovich could no longer hear his father's pleas. The light in his eyes faded, his breath growing shallow with each passing moment. The Tsar's wails echoed through the Kremlin's gilded halls. I have killed my son! I have killed my son! His cries were a chilling lament, a confession of guilt and despair. For days, Ivan kept vigil by his son's bedside, refusing to leave his side even as the Tsarevich's life slipped away. The death of his son and heir plunged Ivan into a deep despair. He had killed his heir, risking the stability of Russia. Remorse and guilt gnawed at him, but it was too late. The damage was done. Ivan's final years were a stark contrast to the grandeur and power that once defined his reign. The death of his son, coupled with the weight of his countless atrocities, had broken his spirit, leaving him a hollow shell of his former self. He withdrew from public life, spending his days in the seclusion of his chambers, haunted by the ghosts of his victims and the spectre of his own mortality. His once keen mind grew increasingly erratic, consumed by paranoia and dark obsessions. He turned to the occult, seeking solace and guidance in the cryptic pronouncements of astrologers and soothsayers. He performed macabre rituals, hoping to ward off the encroaching darkness and perhaps even glimpse his own fate. The once mighty Tsar, the architect of Russia's expansion and consolidation, was now a prisoner of his own fears, a tormented soul seeking redemption in the shadows. His physical health deteriorated as well. The once robust and imposing figure grew frail and stooped, his body crippled by disease and the ravages of time. His once piercing eyes, now clouded with despair, reflected the torment that consumed his soul. The Lion of Russia, the fearsome Ivan the Terrible, was reduced to a mere shadow of his former self, a tragic figure consumed by regret and haunted by the horrors of his own making. The reign of terror that had gripped Russia for so long was nearing its end, but the scars left by Ivan the Terrible would not heal easily. The nation had been plunged into chaos and fear, its people traumatized by years of violence and oppression. The legacy of Ivan's cruelty would cast a long shadow over Russia's future. Chapter 5: The Terrible Legacy. On a cold March day in 1584, as he sat playing chess, Ivan collapsed. The Tsar, who had instilled fear in the hearts of millions, was now at the mercy of his own mortality. He lingered for a few days, his body racked with pain, his mind tormented by visions of the horrors he had unleashed on his people. In his final days, amidst the delirium of his illness, Ivan's past deeds pressed upon his conscience. He called for the meticulous lists he had kept, names of those he had ordered executed, each one a life extinguished by his command. With trembling hands he traced the lines of ink, muttering prayers for their souls. The once mighty Tsar, reduced to a frail and broken man, sought solace in the rituals of his faith, hoping to find absolution for the blood that stained his hands. His final days were filled with feverish prayers and mumbled confessions, a plea for forgiveness from a god he had often defied. The fear that had ruled his reign now gave way to a profound sense of helplessness and regret. Finally, on the 28th of March, 1584, Ivan the Terrible breathed his last. He was 53 years old when he died, having been crowned Tsar at age 16, reigning for 37 years from 1547 to 1584. He remains the second longest reigning Tsar in Russian history, behind Peter the Great, who ruled for 43 years. The news of Ivan's death spread like wildfire through Moscow, a mixture of relief and trepidation filling the air. The tyrant was gone, but the wounds he had inflicted on Russia were deep and festering. With Ivan's death, the throne passed to his surviving son, Fyodor. Fyodor was a gentle and pious man who lacked his father's ruthlessness and ambition. The real power behind the throne shifted to Boris Godunov, Fyodor's brother-in-law, shrewd and ambitious nobleman. Fyodor's reign was marked by relative peace and stability, a welcome respite after the tumultuous years of Ivan's rule. However, the Tsar's lack of a strong heir and his reliance on Godunov set the stage for a new power struggle upon his death. When Fyodor passed away in 1598, the Rurikid dynasty, which had ruled Russia for centuries, came to an end. The ensuing power vacuum plunged the country into a period of chaos and instability known as the Time of Troubles, a turbulent era marked by pretenders to the throne, foreign invasions, and widespread suffering. The legacy of Ivan the Terrible is a complex and contradictory one. He expanded Russia's borders, reformed its legal system, and centralized power, but these accomplishments were achieved at a terrible cost. His reign of terror, the Oprichnina's atrocities, and the countless lives lost to his paranoia and cruelty left an indelible stain on Russian history. By the time of Ivan's death in 1584, the full scale of his reign's devastation was clear. Historians estimate that up to 100,000 lives were lost due to his policies, executions, and military campaigns. Entire regions were depopulated, their agricultural productivity destroyed. The human cost was incalculable. A nation left mourning its lost fathers, mothers, and children. Ivan's expansionist policies had secured Russia's borders and centralized its power. But these achievements were built on a foundation of fear, blood, and broken families. His reign left scars on the land and its people that would last for generations. Ivan's story serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the corrosive effects of fear and suspicion. He was a man of immense talent and vision, but his flaws ultimately consumed him, transforming him into the monster history remembers. Thank you for watching this episode of Fireside Villainies, Ivan the Terrible, a medieval monster. If you liked this episode, Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date with future episodes from Fireside Villainies. And so, the tale of Ivan the Terrible comes to an end, a story of towering ambition, crippling paranoia, and a reign of terror that left deep scars on Russian history. His life stands as a chilling testament of the destructive potential of unchecked power, and the fragility of the human psyche when corrupted by fear. Ivan's villainy lies not just in the sheer scale of his brutality, but in the devastating consequences for his people. The terror of the Oprichnina, the massacre of Novgorod, the torment of his wives, and the murder of his son. These acts paint the picture of a ruler consumed by paranoia, willing to sacrifice his people, his family, and his soul to hold on to power. Yet Ivan's story is not one-dimensional. He was also a reformer who modernized Russia, expanded its borders, and left behind a stronger central government. His reign saw the creation of codified laws and the consolidation of Russian territories. But these accomplishments came at a terrible price, a legacy soaked in blood and cruelty. Ivan remains as a figure of profound complexity, admired by some as a nation builder and protector of the faith, reviled by others as a tyrant and a murderer. The debate over his true nature endures. Was he a visionary leader or a madman driven by fear? His legacy is as conflicted and enduring as the nation he shaped. Thank you for joining me in this sinister chapter in history. I hope this exploration of Ivan the Terrible's life and villainy has been both immersive and thought-provoking. If you're interested in exploring the lives of remarkable and inspiring people who have shaped our world, you might like to check out our sister channel, Fireside Legacies. There's a link in the video description. You can also support Fireside Villainies by becoming a member to help bring more episodes like this to life. Members get access to exclusive content, early access to new episodes, and more. Check out the video description for more info. I think it's worth remembering that history isn't just a collection of dates and facts, it's a tapestry woven with the threads of human experience, both noble and ignoble. And it's through understanding the past, even its darkest chapters, that we can learn to build a better future. Stay tuned to Fireside Villainies for more sinister stories from history. Until next time, tread carefully in history's shadows.